I can't marry nobody like you," Michael shouted, throwing down the mic mid-vows, leaving the bride trembling under the guests' laughter. Sophia stood frozen in her simple white gown, humiliated before 100 scornful eyes. But as the whispers spread, the ground would soon shake. Sophia's hands shook as she clutched the bouquet, petals falling like tears onto the polished marble floor. The cathedral smelled of roses and incense, but the air felt suffocating, pressing down on her chest. Her plain ivory dress, chosen for its honesty rather than extravagance, clung to her small frame. Her dark hair, pulled back in a simple bun, framed a face that carried no makeup, just raw shame. The guests' laughter echoed, sharp and merciless, cutting through the sacred silence. She didn't look at Michael, who stood mere feet away, his face twisted with panic and disgust. Instead, her eyes found a stained glass window where afternoon light painted her in colors she couldn't feel. The moment stretched unbearably as the crowd's whispers grew louder, sharper. The night before, something had haunted Sophia. A black SUV had idled outside her modest apartment, its engine rumbling like a warning. A man in a dark coat emerged, his face hidden by shadows. He handed her an envelope, his voice low and urgent. "Tomorrow you'll need this truth." Inside was a photograph, grainy and worn but unmistakable. Sophia, years younger, in military fatigues, standing with a unit of Marines. Her breath caught. She'd buried that life, locked it away after the mission that shattered her. The man vanished before questions could form. At the rehearsal dinner, the Castellanos' estate gleamed with chandeliers that seemed to mock her presence. Sophia wore a simple gray dress, no jewelry, her hair loose but neat. She didn't belong among silk gowns and tailored suits, and every guest made sure she knew it. A woman in sequined emerald whispered loud enough for Sophia to hear. "An orphan, really? How does someone like her even get invited here?" The friend chuckled, his diamond cufflinks catching light. "Michael's slumming it, I suppose." The laughter grew venomous as Senator Victoria Walsh rose from her front row seat like a predator sensing weakness. Her silver hair was swept into a perfect chignon, her navy suit tailored to broadcast authority. She had been the Castellanos family's most prized political connection, her presence validating their social ambitions. "A failed soldier. Isn't that what you were, Sophia?" Walsh declared, her voice smooth but poisonous. "If you're truly heroic, why did you abandon the military?" The crowd murmured agreement, some nodding smugly. Maybe she deserted. A man in the back called out loud enough for everyone to hear. Michael, emboldened by the senator's attack, sneered with renewed confidence. "Hero, please. It's just a pathetic act for sympathy." Cameras flashed as photographers sensed blood in the water, already crafting tomorrow's headlines. Sophia's knuckles went white around her bouquet, but her face remained stone. She absorbed every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every flash of contempt without breaking, her silence both shield and sword against their assault. A young photographer pushed through the crowd, his camera slung around his neck like a weapon. "This is gold," he shouted, snapping photos of Sophia's motionless figure. The nobody bride ditched at the altar, front-page material for sure. Guests pulled out phones, recording eagerly, their faces bright with the thrill of witnessing her destruction. Social media posts were already going live with cruel captions and mocking hashtags. A woman in diamond earrings leaned forward hungrily. "She doesn't belong here, never did. Look at that bargain basement dress." A man in a navy blazer snorted with wine-fueled cruelty. "What's she even doing in a place like this?" The crowd fed off each other's venom, each insult growing bolder than the last. Michael's ex-girlfriend, Isabella, a tall brunette with a predatory smile, stood and began a slow, mocking applause. "Told you all," she called out, her voice dripping false sympathy. "She's nothing but a social climbing parasite." The cathedral echoed with their collective cruelty as Sophia stood perfectly still, weathering the storm. The ground shook with thunderous force, louder this time. Engines roared outside in a deep, relentless growl, that made the cathedral's ancient stones tremble. The massive doors flew open as 100 black SUVs lined the courtyard, their tires kicking up clouds of dust. Helicopters thundered overhead, their shadows flickering through the stained glass windows like dark angels. Armed Marines in tactical gear poured through the entrance, their boots heavy on the marble floor, moving with synchronized precision. The guests froze in terror, some clutching purses, others shrinking into their seats as the reality hit them. At the front of the formation stood Commander James Hayes, his weathered face stern, his eyes locked directly on Sophia with unmistakable recognition. He strode forward with authority that parted the crowd like Moses splitting the sea. The chandeliers trembled from the helicopter rotors above. Senator Walsh's confident smirk vanished, replaced by growing dread. Michael's face drained of all color, his mouth hanging open in shock. The photographers lowered their cameras, suddenly uncertain. "Captain Ramirez," Commander Hayes said, his voice clear and unwavering as it cut through the cathedral's stunned silence. "It's time you reclaimed your honor." Sophia's bouquet slipped from her trembling hands, hitting the marble floor with a soft thud. The room held its collective breath as his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Hayes ignored the shocked guests, his weathered face focused entirely on the woman they had just finished humiliating. He walked directly to her, stopping inches from the altar steps. With deliberate movements, he produced a classified folder bearing official military seals, its edges worn from years of secrecy. "You've all judged a woman you know nothing about," he announced, turning to face the crowd. His voice carried the authority of decades in uniform. "This is the truth about Captain Sophia Ramirez." The guests exchanged nervous glances, some leaning forward despite themselves. Senator Walsh's hands began to shake. Michael stumbled backward, his arrogance crumbling. The photographers hesitated, unsure whether to capture this moment or flee from whatever truth was about to emerge from that folder. Hayes opened the folder, revealing documents stamped with crimson classified seals. 5 years ago, she led a Marine reconnaissance unit during a covert operation in Somalia. When her team was ambushed by overwhelming enemy forces, Captain Ramirez single-handedly coordinated the evacuation of over 90 soldiers under heavy fire. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the stunned congregation. She carried wounded Marines on her back for 3 miles through hostile territory, refusing to leave anyone behind. The mission was buried, classified to protect political interests, and her name was deliberately erased to cover someone else's failures. A wave of shock rippled through the cathedral. Sophia's eyes found the folder, her breath catching as memories of that hellish day flooded back. The acrid smell of smoke, the weight of injured comrades, the sound of bullets whistling past her head. She had saved lives that day, but paid the price in silence. The guests who had mocked her minutes before now stared with growing comprehension. Senator Walsh's face went ashen, her political mask finally slipping completely. Hayes turned his steely gaze directly on Senator Walsh, whose confident facade crumbled like ancient parchment. "The order to bury Captain Ramirez's heroic service came directly from you, Senator. You profited from defense contracts tied to that fabricated failure report. Millions of dollars flowed into your accounts, while this woman's reputation was destroyed to protect your financial interests." The cathedral erupted in gasps and horrified murmurs. Walsh's perfectly manicured hands trembled as she clutched her designer purse. Sophia stepped forward, her voice quiet but cutting through the chaos like a blade. "So my erased service record was the price of your greed." It wasn't a question, but a statement that landed with devastating accuracy. The guests turned to stare at Walsh, who stood frozen under their collective scrutiny. Her silver hair, once a crown of authority, now seemed to wilt under the weight of exposure. Michael's mother Margaret whispered urgently to her husband, realizing their political connections were crumbling before their eyes. The photographers snapped frantically, sensing the story had shifted dramatically from wedding humiliation to political scandal. A young Marine stepped forward from the formation, his uniform crisp, but his hands trembling with emotion. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "you saved my squad leader in that ambush. You told me how you carried him through enemy fire when everyone else thought we were lost." The crowd shifted uneasily as more Marines began stepping forward, each adding their testimony to the growing chorus of validation. "She pulled 14 of us out when command said we were expendable," another Marine declared, his voice steady with conviction. Hayes raised his hand, and a Marine approached carrying a velvet presentation box. He opened it slowly, revealing the Medal of Honor, its ribbon gleaming brilliantly in the cathedral's light. "This was yours 5 years ago," Hayes said, taking the medal with reverence. "They buried it along with your service record, but truth has a way of surfacing." He handed the medal to Sophia, whose hands trembled as she accepted the weight of long-overdue recognition. The 1,000 Marines snapped to attention in perfect unison, their salutes crisp and unwavering, filling the cathedral with thunderous respect. From one of the SUVs outside, a figure emerged that made Sophia's heart stop completely. A Marine in full tactical gear stepped into the cathedral, his face hidden behind a combat mask. The crowd watched in confused silence as he walked with purpose toward Sophia, his movements deliberate and familiar. He stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the scar above his left eyebrow through the mask's opening. With slow, reverent movements, he reached up and removed the mask completely. The face revealed was older, weathered by years of covert operations, but unmistakably the man Sophia had mourned for 7 long years. "Marcus," her voice broke as she whispered his name, the medal slipping from her trembling fingers before Hayes caught it. He knelt before her, taking her hands in his scarred ones. "I never left you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "They told you I was dead to keep you safe while I finished the mission. I've been working in the shadows all these years, waiting for the moment I could come home to you." The consequences came swiftly and without mercy. 2 federal agents approached Senator Walsh, their badges gleaming under the cathedral lights. "Senator Walsh, you're under arrest for fraud, corruption, and conspiracy against military personnel." Her perfectly composed facade shattered as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Her political career died with the sound of cold steel. Michael collapsed into a pew, his face buried in his hands as the weight of his cruelty crashed down upon him. The Castellanos family quietly distanced themselves, their social ambitions crumbling alongside their corrupt political alliance. Isabella and the mocking guests slipped toward the exits like shadows fleeing daylight, their faces flushed with shame and terror at being exposed. The photographer who had gleefully captured Sophia's humiliation found his camera confiscated, his cruel headlines replaced by a story of heroism and vindication. The guests who had whispered cruel jokes now couldn't meet Sophia's eyes as they hurried past the Marines, desperate to escape their own complicity. The power dynamics had completely reversed, transforming the cathedral from a place of mockery into a temple of justice. Sophia stood with Marcus, her hand firmly in his, the Medal of Honor pinned to her simple wedding gown like armor forged from truth. The Marines formed an honor corridor, their salutes unwavering as the couple walked down the aisle together, not as a bride abandoned, but as a woman reclaimed and a hero recognized. The helicopters outside began to fade into the distance, their mission complete. The remaining guests sat in stunned silence, some weeping quietly, others applauding with genuine remorse and newfound respect. Sophia didn't look back at the wreckage of her former life. Her steps were steady, her spine straight, her hands secure in Marcus's weathered grip. The story would spread across the nation, not as gossip about a wedding disaster, but as truth about a woman who had been judged for her silence and plainness, yet stood taller than them all. As they stepped into the sunlight together, Sophia felt the weight of the medal, but it felt light compared to the burdens she had carried alone. She was no longer nobody. She was Captain Sophia Ramirez, hero, survivor, beloved.